Welcome to our to this session this morning at the Texas Book Festival with H.W. Brands. We're very happy to see such a full tent today. I wanted to let you know my name is Steve Harrigan. I'll be doing a little Q&A with Bill. 15 minutes after the session, Bill will be signing books in the book signing tent, which is between, I believe, 10th and 11th on Congress, just down the street. Please patronize the book signing tent and the bookstore, as you know, and please buy Bill's book, which I think there won't be a problem. But as you know, oh yes, this is the book, The Man Who Saved the Union, Ulysses Grant in War and Peace. If you buy this book, as you know, proceeds from that will go to support Texas libraries and literacy throughout Texas. So it's a great book to read and a great book to fund a worthy cause. Bill Brands, H.W. Brands, is the Dixon Allen Anderson Centennial Professor of History at the University of Texas here in Austin. His focus has been for many years on American history and politics, and his biographies and histories include a number of tremendous books, of which this is just the most recent. They are also Traitor to His Class about Franklin Roosevelt, a biography of Andrew Jackson called Andrew Jackson, The Age of Gold about the gold rush, the American gold rush in the 1840s, The First American about Benjamin Franklin, and TR about Theodore Roosevelt. Together, these books, I think, comprise, not haphazardly, but very purposefully, a history of the United States through the last 200 or so years. A number of these books have been bestsellers. Two of them, Traitor to His Class and The First American, were both finalists for the Pulitzer Prize. And you can see H.W. Brands, Bill Brands on TV all the time if you turn on the History Channel, or if it's 3 in the morning and you turn on the TV, there he is. But this book is, I'm going to hold it up again so you can see it and recognize it easily at the book signing tent. It's a tremendous biography of Ulysses Grant, filled with stuff I certainly never knew and was delighted to find out. It's very authoritative and readable. But before we get to Grant himself, I wanted to ask Bill a more broad question about biography. Because here at the Book Festival, there are a number of biographers. I've read several of these books already. Robert Caro's latest volume in his massive history of biography of Lyndon Johnson, Jan Reed's biography of Ann Richards, and Sylvie Simmons' biography of Leonard Cohen. All these people are at the Book Festival, and among others. I think David Marinus is here with a book about Obama. And I was curious, Bill, because all these books are so different in terms of authors' approaches, subject matter, whether the subject is dead or alive, what kind of access the biographer had to the subject. I'm just curious, do you have a philosophy, having written many biographies, of what exactly a biography should be and what it should do?
Thanks for the question, Steve. Thanks for all of you coming out this morning. I know Sunday morning is sometimes a chore to get people out, and I'm really gratified that so many of you arrived. The question of biography and what I conceive it to be. I'm trained as a historian, and so I tend to look at biographies, which, regardless of how they're written, to some extent all comprise the life and times of your subject. I tend to include more times than some other biographers do. In my experience and observation, biographers tend to come to their subjects from one of two directions. They're either historians, like me, or they're journalists. And sometimes novelists find their way in. But the folks who come from the direction of history tend to sort of borrow an image from filmmaking, they tend to broaden the focus on their character. So you see the character, but you also see more of the background. And the character is at least in part a vehicle for telling the story of the character's times. Journalists and others who come from the non-history direction, I think, tend to have a tighter focus. So their subject fills up more of the frame all the time. Now, beyond that, we could get into the question of what do you make of a life, and how do you reconstruct the lives of people? In some cases they're dead, in some cases they're still living. And that has to do, I think, with, well, one's view of human nature. And I will confess that in times, in some of the books that I've taken on, I really was concerned whether I was qualified to write about the person that I was writing about. First of all, there's the whole question of how can you write a bunch of pages about somebody you never met, about someone whose voice you never heard. You don't know exactly how tall they were. You don't know what impression they made when they walked into a room. And so you don't know some very basic stuff that a person who just encountered your subject for 15 seconds in life knew. The other thing was, there's certain kinds of life experiences that we all share. So we were all children at one time, and so you can imagine that if your subject, if little Benjamin Franklin is toddling around colonial Boston, you can imagine what that might have been like. When I was writing about Franklin, though, I realized that a large part of the story was going to consist of Franklin growing old, because he became America's emissary to France during the American Revolution at the age of 70. And I started writing about Franklin when I was around 40 or so. And I really wondered whether I was going to be able to understand what it was like to grow old and infirm, which was a very large part of the Franklin story. And partly for this reason, I decided, and this is carried through in my other books, I decided to tell my stories. I tried to relate the lives of my characters as much as possible through the perceptions, the words of people who saw them, people who knew them. My books tend to have more of sort of eyewitness stuff than some others. And if I have a choice between writing a scene in my own words and writing a scene in the words of somebody who was there, I will tend toward the person who was there. I think that conveys a certain authenticity, and then, just I will say, it relieves me of the burden of providing the authority. Because the question that anyone should have in reading a work of history is, well, how does the author know what he's telling me? And if I can make it very clear, it's not me that's really telling you this. The room looked like this. Benjamin Franklin seemed like this, to somebody who was actually there. So that's a roundabout answer to your question.
Great. Well, let's get directly to Ulysses Grant. The book is called, as you know, The Man Who Saved the Union, Ulysses Grant and War and Peace. I have two questions about this title, Bill. One is, what happened to the S in Ulysses S. Grant?
It's not there?
No.
What are you going to do with editors? No, I'll tell you the answer. The answer is that the S was an artifact. He wasn't born Ulysses S. Grant. He was born Hiram Simpson Grant. And he always went by, he was born Hiram Ulysses Grant. He always went by his middle name. I have sympathy for people who go by our middle names. And so his birth name was not Ulysses S. Grant. He eventually became known as Ulysses S. Grant when he became president, but he signed things U.S. Grant. And I don't know if there is a memory of my own from childhood that drew me to Grant, but in the neighborhood that I grew up in Portland, Oregon, there was a public park. And the sign on the public park was U.S. Grant Park. For the longest time, I thought this was a federally owned park, named for somebody that had been granted to the city for some reason or other. So that's part of the answer. The other answer is I had a hard time convincing the people who designed the dust jacket to get all the words on there that are already on there. So The Man Who Saved the Union, Ulysses Grant in War and Peace. That's a lot of words. And then you also have to, if I can show it.
Yes, hold it up.
You also have to have space for a photograph. And so I didn't want to push things. Just one last thing, and that is Ulysses Grant. That sort of rolls off the tongue. Add an S in there. Ulysses S. Grant? Nah.